Welcome to this special presentation today. My name is Peter Ord. I'm the Executive Director for the Bateman Foundation. Just before we get started, it is customary to do our traditional land acknowledgement. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the Bateman Gallery stands, and to honor our connection with the Songhees and Esquimalt peoples, whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day and into the future. So we have a very special presentation. We have a guest of Thomas Mangelsen, whose exhibit, Life in the Wild, is featured here at the Bateman Gallery. We'll be starting off with a small couple of slides about the Bateman Foundation. Then I'll be introducing Thomas, who will be making a presentation for half an hour. Then after that, I'll be introducing our patron, Mr. Robert Bateman, talking a little bit about him. And then we'll have a wonderful discussion between Mr. Mangelsen and Mr. Bateman, and that should go into about 6:15 Pacific time. And there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. We did have a whole bunch of questions come through. We'll make sure we'll be using those first. Hopefully we'll be finished by 6:30 Pacific time. Just want to thank you all for logging on, tuning in, and hopefully enjoying this great presentation. So just a little bit about the Bateman Foundation. So the Bayman Foundation is here in the steamship terminal building here in the Inner Harbor. This is the steamship terminal, which was built in 1924. We're on the main floor, and we're actually broadcasting for a small little studio on that building. The Bayman Gallery has been here since 2013. Of course, it was started by Mr. Robert Bateman, Birgit Freby Bateman, and the Bateman family. And the Bateman Foundation now is, happy to say, 8 years old. The gallery, as you can see, is focused primarily on the works of Mr. Robert Bateman. We also have a temporary gallery which shows different shows, different exhibits from other artists, and of course, Mr. Mangelsen being one of our latest. And then we also have a gift shop which we feature right here. Another important thing that we do is our Nature Sketch program. This is the main program which we do nationally and now internationally. This is our flagship art education program, which uses established eco-literacy principles and sketching techniques from Robert Bateman. This is something we do to youth and adults, and more recently, we're working with schools and other organizations. Of course, our main reason for being here today is our a special presentation by Thomas on his amazing exhibit called A Life in the Wild. And here we have a couple of shots of the exhibit within the gallery. Just who is Mr. Mangelsen? I'm sure most of you definitely know who he is, but I'm just going to spend a few minutes to just introduce him. Renowned American nature and wildlife photographer, Thomas D. Mangelsen has traveled throughout the natural world for over 35 years, observing and photographing Earth's last great wild places. A Nebraska native, Mangelsen's love of nature, his life outdoors, and business success were heavily influenced by his father. An avid sportsman, Harold Mangelsen took his sons to favorite blinds along the Platte River in Nebraska to observe the great flocks of ducks, geese, and cranes that migrate through the valley. From these adventures, Mangelsen learned important lessons for photographing in the field, most notably patience and understanding animal behavior. In 1965, Mangelsen began studying business at the University of Nebraska. In 1967, Tom transferred to Doane College in Crete, Nebraska, where he changed his major and graduated with a bachelor's degree in biology. Tom continued postgraduate study in zoology and wildlife biology at the University of Nebraska and Colorado State University. In 1970, Tom moved to Nederland, Colorado. He spent 2 years living in the Rocky Mountains in an old mining shack without electricity or running water with his English setter, black lab, and raccoon. Tom continued to work on his photography and studied Arctic alpine ecology at the University of Colorado's Mountain Research Station near Nederland. There, he met Bert Kempers, a CU film producer, who later hired Tom as cinematographer and film editor for his company, West Wind Productions, making educational and nature documentaries. Tom longed to make a documentary about the Platte River and its great wildlife resource. He returned to the Platte each spring to film the great crane migration. These experiences led to Tom traveling to the cranes' nesting grounds in Alaska and their wintering areas in Texas. National Geographic Television wanted to produce a documentary which would chronicle the plight of the endangered whooping crane and the efforts to bring them back from the brink of extinction. After learning that Tom had photographed sandhill whooping cranes for more than 10 years, they hired him as cinematographer and associate producer for the television special Flight of the Whooping Crane, which was nominated for an Emmy Award. Mangelsen also photographed and produced the PBS Nature and BBC Nature Natural World film, Cranes of the Grey Wind, a documentary on the life cycle of the sandhill crane. Initially, Mangelsen was fascinated with photographing birds in flight. In the early 1970s, Tom and his brother David began selling limited edition prints of his images. In 1978, Tom opened his first Images of Nature gallery in Jackson, Wyoming. Since then, a number of Mangelsen Images of Nature gallery locations have opened across the United States. One of the most prolific nature photographers of our time, Tom is as much an artist as he is a conservationist. Tom was named the 2011 Conservation Photographer of the Year by Nature's Best Photography, placing his work in the permanent collection at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. He was named one of the 40 most influential nature photographers by Outdoor Photography. His image, Polar Dance, was selected by the International League of Conservation Photographers as one of the 40 most important nature photographs of all time. He was chosen as one of Dr. Jane Goodall's Heroes of the Animal Planet and profiled in the television series of the same name. Mangelsen was named one of the 100 most important people in photography by American Photo magazine and honored with Nikon's Legend Behind the Lens recognition. The North American Nature Photography Association named him Outstanding Nature Photographer of the Year, and Mangelsen also received the prestigious British Broadcasting Corporation's Wildlife Photographer of the Year award. He was presented with an honorary doctorate from Doane College and received an honorary fellowship from the Royal Photographic Society. Tom's photographs have been exhibited internationally, showcased in Vital Signs, Images of Biodiversity. This exhibit was a combination of Tom's art and knowledge of natural history and stressed the importance of maintaining a balanced and diverse ecosystem. Vital Signs opened at the San Diego Natural History Museum in 1997, was also exhibited in museums throughout the United States and Canada. Tom's photography has been shown at the Natural History Museum in London, the Joslin Art Museum in Omaha, Nebraska, and a major exhibit at the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson, Wyoming, and the San Diego Natural History Museum. Tom joined fellow renowned nature photographers Franz Lanting and Art Wolf in presenting the Masters of Nature Photography seminars. The three prominent photographers represent a unique event drawing on their wide-ranging experience with subjects and locations around the world to change how photography is looked at and empower attendees to use photography to benefit conservation causes and other personal interests. It is with the honor that we present Thomas Mangelsen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this virtual event. It's one of my greatest honors in my career to be here in the company of Robert Bateman's work. I would like to give a special thank you to my dear friend Bob and the Bateman Foundation for including me here in the exhibits and for inviting me to this presentation today. I'd also like to thank you, Peter Ward, again, the Executive Director, Aaron Henshaw, and Lauren Ball. I want to recognize David Wagner for organizing the dual tours of my exhibit, including here at the Bateman Center. The tours will include about 20 venues over the next 4 years through 2023. Dave previously produced tours for other Bateman exhibits. During the following presentation, I will talk about my early influences and the people that have inspired and mentored me along the way. Robert Bateman has long been the biggest influence in my photography, and I will show some of his paintings, some of my images, which will exemplify this. Lastly, I will talk about a number of the images in the legacy exhibit. Flashback to 1969. I was 23 and had just graduated from college. I hadn't yet begun photography and had just purchased my first camera. However, I was already keenly aware and drawn to Robert Bateman's art. Bob Bateman, Andrew Wyeth's, and Owen Grammy's paintings made a huge impression on me. I think it was in their uncanny ability to see what most of us cannot. Robert Bateman's compositions and concepts are so unconventional and unexpected. No detail is by accident. In the early 70s, I was living in Boulder, Colorado, making wildlife films for the University of Colorado and making $2.50 an hour. A postcard-sized image of coyote and winter sage was taped above my film editing desk. I loved it for many reasons, but could rationally not afford it at the time. When I could, it had long been sold out. The image exemplified the West as I knew it, even to the surprise detail of a faded Budweiser can hidden in the sage, likely thrown out of a pickup window. The beauty of the coyote, sage, glacial stones, long prairie grasses, and the beer can are all such symbols of the West. It made me think about the coyote's long time and thoughtless persecution. Print number 314 of 950 of Coyote and Winter Sage hangs in my living room today behind me. In 1997, Bob had a retrospective exhibit at the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson, where I live. One morning, he and his wife, Birgit, visited my gallery. I'll never forget Bob saying, "That moose in the snow looks like a Bateman. I wish I had painted it." That was one of the greatest compliments I'd ever received. People often ask me how I got started and what inspired me. I was born and raised with my three brothers in Grand Island, Nebraska. My earliest memories are fishing with my father. Those bigger catfish are the ones I caught. We never figured out why Mom didn't put a life vest on Billy. Like most siblings, we were quite different. One of four sons, I was the only one to leave the family business, Harold W. Mangelsen and Sons. We had a cabin, a one-room schoolhouse on the Platte River, 23 miles west of Grand Island. My dad had hunted there since 1932. He taught me how to paint, make, set decoys, how to build blinds, and how to call ducks and geese. My father's greatest gifts were teaching me about natural history and how to be patient. My brother Billy and I setting out decoys at the end of 1950 summer when the first water returned to the dry river. We celebrated when friends 100 miles upriver at North Platte called us and said the water is coming. In the 1800s, the Platte had been a navigable river used by explorers, fur trappers, and settlers on their way west. Every summer during the 1950s and 60s, the river would go dry due to the diversion of water to irrigate cornfields. In the decades when the river went dry, grasses, willows, and cottonwoods established themselves, slowly choking the mile-wide river, changing it forever. My father fought against the continued exploitation of the river's water and campaigned to return more of it to the river. It was one of my first lessons in conservation. The Platte had a huge influence on me. My family and I spent many hours and days hunting, fishing, and just observing. Although I gave up hunting many years ago, I still visit our cabin every spring to witness the spectacular migration of waterfowl and cranes. As a freshman in college, I won the world's goose calling championship. I actually won it twice. The $1,000 savings bond sticking out of my pocket took me to Europe, where I hitchhiked around on $5 a day for the summer. That experience opened my eyes to travel and that there was much to learn about life beyond Nebraska. In 1969, I graduated from Doane College in Nebraska with a degree in biology. Paul Johnsgaard, professor at the University of Nebraska and the world's authority on waterfowl, had written and illustrated with his own drawings and photographs numerous books on birds, natural history, and animal behavior. Wanting to continue my interest in wildlife, I wrote him and naively asked if he would consider being my graduate advisor. He asked me to bring my transcripts and have an interview. When he saw my grades, he said that he only takes 4 or 5 graduate students a year. They were all grade A students, which I wasn't. I knew what he was going to say, so immediately I told him I was the world's goose calling champion and a cabin on the Platte. He paused and then said, "Well, we do make exceptions." Paul was an avid bird photographer, and I had just bought my first camera. He taught me much about birds, animal behavior, and the basics of wildlife photography. Later, I became his field assistant, and we traveled across America in search of waterfowl. Last year, Paul sent me the following in an email. Would you believe that 50 years ago this summer, a scruffy teenager showed up at my office and told me he wanted to be a wildlife photographer? And added, "Dreams sometimes come true, as they have for us. It has been a great ride. At 90, the same age as Bob, Paul has just published his 106th book, one of several that we have collaborated on. A few weeks ago, we spent a long weekend on the Missouri photographing migrating swans. I will see them on the Platte in March. Most of us are lucky enough to have at least one special teacher or mentor in our lives. Paul was mine. After 2 years in graduate school, I moved to the Rocky Mountains west of Boulder, Colorado, and worked for a small film company making animal behavior films. Here in 1980, I was filming whooping cranes for a National Geographic TV special, Flight of the Whooping Crane, on the wintering grounds at Aransas National Wildlife Refuge in Texas. In 1941, whooping cranes were on the brink of extinction. There are only 16 hoopers surviving in the wild. During the late 70s and early 80s, when I was filming and photographing them, there were about 60. Today, there are over 800. One of the few great endangered species success stories. I became consumed with crane, and for the following 10 years, I made 2 more films about sandhill and whooping cranes with BBC and PBS. I love the storytelling aspect of filmmaking, but I kept being drawn back to the challenge of still photography. This was one of my first limited edition photographs. Of course, it would be of a goose I photographed with Paul in 1975. I never imagined it would be the beginning of a long journey, not only to all 7 continents, but also lead to a retrospective exhibition here at the Bateman Museum. The 48 legacy photographs represent my nearly 50-year career in photography, gleaned from nearly 4 million images in my library. I started numbering my limited editions at number 26, wanting to keep the first 25 numbers for my family, special friends, and donations for conservation. 4 or 5 years ago, I started contemplating what to do with the first 25 prints and more than 1,600 images I had limited edition print in my portfolio. I wasn't getting any younger, and maybe it would be wise to print, number, and sign at least the most special, favorite, and artistic ones, which became this exhibit. Owen Grommy and Robert Bateman were among the first to make limited edition prints from their original oil paintings. Owen was the one who convinced me that I should try and do the same with my photographs. Owen Grommy, Wintering Quail Oil Painting, 1970. Owen Grommy was born in 1896 and remained painting almost till his death at age 96. He was frequently referred to as the Dean of American Wildlife Artists. His son Roy, who I worked with in Colorado, and I often visited Owen at his farmhouse in Wisconsin. I loved sitting in Owen's studio, watching him paint and just talking with him. One day I naively asked him, "How long does it take you to do a painting?" He looked at me with a smile and said, "Boy, all my life." That was in the early 70s, and I was in my mid-20s. I was one of the more profound phrases I'd ever heard. A painting, whether it be Owen's or Bob's, involves a culmination of a life in the wild, observing, remembering the light, the mood, the gestures, behavior, and composition. Cranes of the Gray Wind, 2011. Although I travel extensively, the only trip I make annually to return to my roots is the Platte River. I stay at the same hunting cabin I grew up in, where I took my first photographs of flying ducks, geese, and cranes. Every March, 500,000 sandhill cranes and more than 15 million snow geese and other waterfowl migrate through Nebraska. To understand what a wonder of the natural world that migration is, Jane Goodall has been visiting my cabin every March for the past 18 years to witness the event and to refuel her spirit. The cranes will spend a month along the Platte, roosting at night and feeding the fallow cornfields during the day. This is truly one of the most incredible bird spectacles in the natural world. I had the honor of hosting Bob and Birgit along with Jane at my cabin on the Platte a few years ago. We had a wonderful time catching up, watching cranes, snow geese, and bald eagles. In my memory, the calls of the birds were intermingled with our own laughter. While I was preparing for this presentation, looking at Bob's work on my own, I saw with fresh eyes just how much Bob influenced my photography over the years. You can see Bob's inspiration in many of my images. Bateman, Master of the Herd, African Buffalo. Bob has done many paintings of Cape Buffalo, one of Africa's big 5, one of the most impressive and most dangerous animals. I also love photographing them. Bob painted this in 1975. Morning Thunder, 1994. It would take me another 20 years to come anywhere near close to Bob's images of these incredible beasts. The thorny acacia branch crossing his face. The bull bothered me at first, but I learned from Bob's art that such a distraction may actually add to the tension or drama of an image. I don't know how many trips Bob has made to Africa. I know he taught in Nigeria from 1963 to 1965 and has been there many times since. My first trip to Africa was in 1987. I returned approximately 25 more times. Africa is my favorite continent and Serengeti my favorite place to photograph. It took a lot of gear in those days. This is Bob's painting titled Leopard at Serenera from 1974. Shades of Sapphire. Years later, in 2002, I captured this leopard at Serenera. There are not many trees in the vast plain around Serenera. This old sausage tree and leopard are along a small creek. It often made me wonder if Bob and I were in the same place years apart, and even possibly if this leopard descended from the leopard Bob saw 28 years earlier. It's a nice thought regardless. I've photographed leopards in the Serengeti many times, but this is by far my favorite. We had seen this leopard the day before hunting in the tall grass, but as night fell, she disappeared. We returned the following morning and found her stretched across a huge branch of a sausage tree, her tiny cub hidden behind her. Her eyes were nearly the same sapphire color as the lichen in the tree. People often ask me, because of the white sky, if this image is photoshopped. She was in deep shadow, so getting the correct exposure was tricky. If I exposed her, I would lose the sky, which had little detail anyway. East Africa is hot and the sky tends to go white, with the dust and smoke that is always in the air. I admire how Bob uses white skies and negative spaces in his backgrounds. Here's Bob's painting, Lone Raven, 2002. Bob has spoken about the use of broad strokes like great abstract impressionist Franz Klein. Bob said, big black strokes on a white background, which makes you think of Japanese calligraphy. American kestrels, 1984. I spotted this pair of kestrels in Lamar Valley of Yellowstone, recording and defending their territory among a small grove of aspens. The male on the lower branch, in a matter of an hour, chased off a red-tailed hawk, attacked another male kestrel, caught a mouse for his mate, mated with her, then he yawned. I later realized in my haste to get the photo, I had double exposed 2 rolls of film. My heart sank. Luckily, this frame survived. Bateman's Baobab and Impala, 1975. Baobabs are my favorite tree on earth, and I love this painting. Bob talks about the use of including the impalas to show scale. They also lend the element of surprise, important in a painting or a photograph. Cherengiri Treehouse, 2012. Similarly, the leopard here gives not only scale, but also surprise to this enormous ancient baobab that may likely predate the time of Jesus walking on the earth. Bob often talks not only about endangered species, but also endangered spaces. Very important during these times. This painting of his from 1991 is entitled Endangered Spaces, Grizzly. While working on the Sandhill Crane film in Prince William Sound in Southeast Alaska, I had a week between shoots. On my flight from Cordova to Anchorage, I saw an article in Alaska Airlines magazine about the brown bears at Brooks River in Katmai National Park. I've seen hundreds of published pictures of brown bears from Brooks Falls before. Most were full body portraits or wide angle scenes of the gathering of bears fishing. However, I had never seen just a head and shoulders portrait of a bear with the salmon entering its mouth and wondered if it were possible. We began pre-visualizing the scene, and impulsively I decided to go to Brooks Falls. I spent a week there from dawn until dusk. Some days there were a dozen or more bears, other days there were none. Most days it rained. I'd seen the image I had hoped for to occur several times during the week, but it happened so fast I couldn't be sure if I'd reacted quickly enough to capture it. It would be more than a month before I would see the developed film. This image is not only my most iconic, but also my most controversial. Even though it was made in 1988, long before digital, many people still think it was manipulated. And I ask, where would the magic be if it were? Satika and her son, 1995. Bateman's painting of an orca and her son in the Johnstone Strait in British Columbia. Calm morning, 1992. Orcas at Johnstone Strait a few years earlier. I know both Bob and I thrive on atmosphere, which we both prefer over blue skies. Guardian of Night Inlet in 2005. That May, I was on a trip to the Great Bear Rainforest in British Columbia. I was there to photograph brown and black bears. On the first day, we went out on a small fishing boat to survey the bay. When I saw this rock outcropping, the fog and mountains in the background, I jokingly asked my guide, Jamie, if he could arrange to have a black bear on top of the outcropping. I specifically asked for a black bear, not a brown bear, because I had fewer pictures of black bears. Jamie smiled and laughed at me and said, sure, no problem. The next week, we cruised the shoreline looking for bears. On the final day, it was pouring rain, and we had to catch our float plane out that afternoon. There wasn't much enthusiasm to go out, but it was our last few hours, so we did. As we rounded the bend and the outcropping came into view, we saw this huge black bear eating mussels that were exposed at low tide. As Bob has quoted the Hyde as saying, when the tide is out, the table is set. We approached slowly and quietly. As the bear started climbing towards the top, I was shooting madly with both my film camera and my first digital camera. It was an incredible scene beyond serendipitous. On our way back to the lodge, Jamie turned to me and said, Tom, in my 7 years of guiding here, I have never seen a bear on that point. We both laughed. This is the first print I made using a digital camera. Weeks later, when I returned home while looking at the image closely, I was reminded of seeing the old rusty cable anchored to the rocks below the bear, and I said to myself, damn, or something more profound. Seeing the hand of man in an otherwise perfect scene. Back at the office, my assistant Jonathan knew my incredible frustration, and although he knew I wouldn't let him digitally remove it, he volunteered to do it anyway. I said, no, it's part of the scene. Later, I realized how important the cable and anchor were to the story. I remember flying in on the float plane, seeing many large areas of great rainforest had been totally clear cut. The forest looked like it had been nuked. Only a small corridor along the shoreline was spared, most likely for aesthetics. I also saw huge barges loaded with logs heading south. Staring at the photograph, it dawned on me that the cable had been used to anchor the barges as the ancient trees were skidded down the slopes onto the barges. Rather than removing the cable and anchor digitally, I told Jonathan it was a metaphor for man's environmental impact on an otherwise wild landscape, somewhat akin to Bateman's beer can, maybe in the winter sage. Hence the title I came up with, Guardian of Night Inlet. Snake River Crossing, 2010. For many years, I tried to capture herds of elk migrating across the Snake River at sunrise. In 2010, I dedicated 3 weeks in hopes of getting the crossing. As the sun came over the mountains and highlighted the mist rising off the river, a bull and his harem of a dozen cows began crossing the river. As another bull bugled in the distance, this bull could not resist, briefly pausing to answer another bull's challenge. Polar Dance, 1989. My first adventure to Canada's Hudson Bay in Manitoba to photograph polar bears was in 1987. I'd only hoped to get a few good photos of polar bears for a chapter about the Arctic for my first book, Images of Nature. Little did I know I would become addicted to polar bears and spend the next 10 years photographing them. It was a late November day with a bitter north wind and a ground blizzard. Our kind of day, said my Canadian friend, writer, and photographer, Fred Broomer, as we watched and photographed the two giant bears play fighting. They were agile and graceful dancers, appearing and then disappearing in the near white conditions. Afterwards, when the bears lay down to cool off, Fred looked at me and only smiled, knowing we had witnessed and photographed something very special. Polar Dance became one of my most favorite images and one of the most loved photographs I've ever made. A few years ago, the International League of Conservation Photographers recognized it as one of the 40 most important natures of all time. Bad Boys of the Arctic, 1992. A female polar bear and her two 3-year-old male cubs cross the icy landscape of Hudson Bay. They lay down 75 yards from me. One of the cubs used the broken ice as a pillow. This has become one of my most popular images, perhaps because it reminds us of ourselves. Born of the North Wind, 1993. For 10 years and nearly 80,000 frames later, I always felt that I never captured the true essence of polar bears and their habitat until this image. It shows a lone polar bear with his little Arctic fox companion about to go out on the ice and spend the winter hunting seals. The pink sky and ground blizzard all added to how I envision the ice bear. Unfortunately, this kind of scene is quickly disappearing due to climate change. Amboseli Crossing, 1994. This family of elephants crossing the dusty plain in Kenya's Amboseli National Park on their journey from a watering hole epitomizes Africa's dry season. The last light of day, the perfect line against the dark sky, and their tails blowing in unison make this image special. Bath time in Maasai land, 1994. A cheetah mother in Maasai Mara Park gives her cubs a bath after they feasted on Thompson's gazelle. With their full stomachs, they will spend the night under the protection of a whistling thorn acacia. Light in the Forest, 1998. Bandhavgarh, India is one of the last strongholds of the highly endangered Bengal tigers. Once a private hunting preserve of the Maharaja, now unfortunately, it's a national park. This tigress was 18-month-old daughter of Sita, the most famous matriarch of Bandhavgarh. In 1998, I spent 5 weeks searching for tigers in Bandhavgarh's mountainous jungles, some days in small jeeps, other days on elephant back. Midday temperatures often rose to 125 degrees. At daybreak one morning, the mahout, the elephant's handler, flagged me down and said to quickly climb aboard his elephant. We made our way slowly up the steep mountain slope to the top of the escarpment. Once there, we found Sita's beautiful daughter draped over a rock, watching for prey in the valley below. Her giant paws showed evidence of a midnight feast. It was one of the most magnificent scenes I had ever witnessed. But unfortunately, it was too dark to photograph. We waited quietly and hoped she would move until the light came over the mountain. An hour later, the sun broke through and lit her face and vegetation beyond. There was just enough light to make a few frames. Moments later, she rose, took a big stretch, turned, and disappeared into the forest. Spirit of the Mountains. For years, I'd hoped to even get a glimpse of a mountain lion. People often ask why I didn't have photos of mountain lions, also called cougars and pumas. So I had images of tigers, lions, leopards, and cheetahs. I knew that 98% of cougar pictures were taken at game farms, basically rent-a-cat, where they're kept in small cages 365 days a year, only to be taken out as wildlife models for photographers, filmmakers, and artists. I had no interest in participating in this cruel and inhumane industry. I accepted that maybe cougars would be a species I would never see or photograph in the wild. Then on Valentine's Day, 1999, a cougar with her 3 small kittens showed up in a den on the National Wildlife Refuge, 10 miles south of my cabin. The cats became an obsession with me. I realized after spending 42 days from dawn until dusk that if this mother walked a couple of miles in any direction, she could be legally killed by trophy hunters. Her kittens left to starve and freeze to death in the den. Documenting those days led me to funding the Cougar Fund, which main goal is to educate people and to increase awareness of the value of cougars in the wild. To learn more, please go to cougarfund.org. Rainwalk, 2002. In Tutu Conservation Area, Tanzania, we almost always see giraffes in wooded areas eating acacia leaves. It's rare to see them open like this. In addition, you can see flamingos and zebras giving scale and perspective to these magnificent animals who have recently been put on the endangered species list as threatened. A classification I have never could have thought of when I first went to Africa, joining other African species like rhinos and elephants, lions and leopards. Gentle Giant, 2003, Virunga National Park, Rwanda. This is my second trip to Virunga to photograph gorillas. During my first trip a few years earlier, I realized I'd concentrated too much on family groups. I had missed the most impressive of all, the dominant silverbacks. Park rules only allow an hour per day to photograph the gorillas. I decided to spend an hour each of the 3 days we were there concentrating on silverbacks. I'd waited 45 minutes for this one to wake up and almost gave up. My time was running out. Then I saw a movement. I saw these giant eyes staring at me through the leaves. Druid's Frosty Morning Passage, 2008. It was mid-January and 20 below zero. We saw the Druid pack of wolves in Yellowstone. The Druids were the most famous pack because they were the original wolves that were reintroduced in 1995. The numbers in the pack fluctuated wildly. In 2008, there were 15 animals in the pack. We'd followed the Druids up the Lamar Valley the evening before as they hunted and patrolled their territory. That morning, I saw these cottonwood trees covered with hoarfrost. A bit further down the road, we saw the Druids heading towards the cottonwoods. We turned around and quickly went ahead to the trees, knowing the wolves were likely following the Soda Creek. The sun was just coming up over the ridge, the background still deep in blue shadow. I framed the image for the trees and waited for the long line of wolves. Unfortunately, due to mange and interspecies conflict, the Druid pack was wiped out in 2010. Mountain Outlaw, 2014. Spring, when the roads first open in Yellowstone, is the best time to look for bears. For years, bears would discover carcasses of bison that had fallen through the ice on the Yellowstone River. This particular year, there were 5 bears fighting over a bison carcass and taking turns feasting on it. One of the bears was a female in estrus. She swam the river and crossed the highway behind us. Soon after, several male bears followed her trail and squabbled in the woods. This huge old bear with battle scars emerged from the forest, obviously the victor. He was trying to see where the female had gone, which was not far, on the opposite side of my vehicle. Standing near my car door, I made this picture as he approached. Then I quickly jumped into my vehicle, abandoning my tripod and camera, the 600mm lens and 2x extender. We sauntered by, crossed the highway, went on to court the female, and eventually mated with her. First Light Grizzly Bear, 2010. One October morning, we walked down to where the Snake River bends in hopes of finding an elk herd crossing the river in front of Mount Moran. As we approached the river, we saw something dark in the gravel bar on the opposite shore. With binoculars, we saw that it was a grizzly pulling a freshly killed elk out of the river. We didn't expect it to be a bear, only elk. For the next 5 days, we went out to observe the bear, whom we recognized as 399, so named by bear researchers. I photographed 399 for 15 years and published a book with writer Todd Wilkinson in 2015, The Grizzlies of Pilgrim Creek. 399 is the most famous bear on earth and draws crowds like a rock star. She is also a poster child for grizzlies in the lower 48, who are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. She has amazing intelligence, often looks both ways before crossing a busy highway. The Guardian, 2020. People often ask me what I'm doing in this time of COVID. After spending 2 months in Nebraska with my brother David at our cabin on the Platte, watching cranes and eating too much junk food, I returned to Wyoming on May 4th. On May 18th, Grand Teton National Park reopened. That afternoon, 399 surprised everyone when she was seen walking down Pilgrim Creek with not only 1 or 2 cubs, but with 4. Quadruplets are extremely rare in the Yellowstone ecosystem, accounting for less than 2% of grizzly litters. Even more amazing, 399 was 24 years old, which is considered the end of most grizzlies' life. She has 21 descendants, of which half have survived. She's my favorite bear. Seeing the 5 of them reignited my passion to continue documenting her and her family. My record of days photographing a single individual was the 42 days photographing the cougars. This year, I spent 56 consecutive days in the park trying to photograph 399. And since then, another 150 days. I need to get a life. Here they are, crossing the Snake River on a fall day. The previous year, fat as a tick and without cubs, 399 had gone to the den on November 2nd. But this year it was mid-December and she hadn't even begun her journey. Then on December 30th, 399 started her long trek, about 25 miles from the southern end of Teton Park. Went through my yard to her denning area, up Pilgrim Creek in the National Forest. The snow was very deep by the time she made it to Pilgrim Creek. New Year's Day, 2021, 399 completed her journey to Pilgrim Creek Den. It was amazing to see that she made it through the spring, summer, and fall with all 4 cubs in tow, looking healthy, a rare feat for any grizzly. We can't wait for the spring when she hopefully reappears. It was incredible she survived all the highway crossings, the 5 million visitors to the park, and all the potential conflicts with hunters during the elk hunting season. Documenting her all these years, I realized what a spirit she has, her intelligence, sentience, personality, and resilience to living in our compromised world. She has been such a gift to so many, including me. I'm very grateful for life in the wild, witnessing and capturing scenes like this. The more I travel and experience the last great wild places, the longer my bucket list becomes. Thank you all very much. A special thanks to you, Bob and Birgit, for all your inspiration and support. Thank you.
I just want to say it was such a treat, Tom. My pulse was up for the whole time. Still up there.
Thank you, Robert.
Oh, so yummy.
Thank you.
Wonderful, Thomas. It really was incredible. As in all beautiful art, it's always the narratives from the artist and the originator that makes it so much richer. And I wish you could have been here to help us provide a little bit more perspective in person, but I think this comes a very close second.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, obviously, to do this, and a pleasure to know Robert and Birgit all these years. And as you can tell, I've been totally enamored with his work and his life, and his advocacy is like none other. And he and Jane probably are my favorite people as far as protecting the environment and what they do for wildlife and the earth. So I've been very, very lucky to have known the 3 of them and Paul and many others. So I've been blessed.
Feelings mutual.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Before we get to the discussion between the 2 of you, what I'd like to do is introduce Mr. Bateman to the crowd. And this will just take a few minutes. I think most of you probably know Robert and all his work, but just in case there's a few tidbits you weren't aware of. Robert Bateman, born in Toronto with a degree in geography from the University of Toronto, Robert Bateman taught high school for 20 years, including 2 years in Nigeria. He traveled around the world in 1957 and 58, increasing his appreciation of cultural and natural heritage. Since leaving teaching in 1976 to paint full-time, he has traveled widely with his artist, conservationist wife, Birgit, to many remote natural areas. The family moved to Salt Spring Island in 1985. And we were also honored to have the works of the photography of Birgit here at the Bateman Gallery. And I think many of you know that Birgit is an accomplished photographer in her own right. Robert has been a keen artist and naturalist from his early days. He has always painted wildlife and nature, beginning with a representational style, moving through Impressionism and Cubism to abstract expressionism. In his early 30s, he moved back to realism as a more suitable way to express the particularity of the planet. It is this style that has made him one of the foremost artists depicting the world of nature. In the 1970s and early 80s, Robert's work began to receive critical acclaim and to attract an enormous following. His work is in many public and private collections and several art museums, including the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson, Wyoming. Robert has had many one-man museum shows throughout North America, including an exhibition at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. The retrospective show, The Art of Robert Bateman, toured Canada and the US for 2 years, and a one-man show toured 4 cities in Russia. Robert's art reflects his commitment to ecology and preservation. Since the early 1960s, he has been an active member of naturalist and conservation organizations, now on a global scale. He has become a spokesperson for many environmental and preservation issues and has used his artwork and limited edition prints in fundraising efforts that have provided millions of dollars for those worthy causes. Books about his life and art have had sales of over 1 million copies. His latest book, Robert Bateman's Canada, was released in October 2017, followed by a book commemorating the Canada's called Bateman Across Canada. He's also been the subject of several films and television programs. His honors, awards, and honorary doctorates are numerous and include the Officer of the Order of Canada, as well as the Officer of British Columbia. It is in honor of Bateman's contribution to art, teaching, and conservation that 1 public and 2 secondary schools have been named after him. As well, he has been awarded 14 honorary doctorates, including from here at the University of Victoria. Many of his early works are on display at the Bateman Gallery here in the Inner Harbour of Victoria. It is a place where insights into his life and philosophies can be explored. He is associated in the public mind with pro-nature education by his work, writings, and public speaking. He is a natural and gregarious teacher, and his artwork is vastly instructive. Robert Bateman is perceived by many to be one of the voices of reason and hope for healthy, rejuvenated, and creative engagement with the natural world. So it's with honor, I'd like to kick off with this panel discussion. Mr. Bateman, if you'd like to say maybe a few words about your artwork that you're doing these days and what fulfills your time.
I guess my head right now is full of Tom Mangelsen. And it's such a delight to have him at the Bateman Gallery. Birgit and I are looking forward to getting in. We're not supposed to travel these days, but we're looking forward to getting in and actually seeing them in the flesh, so to speak, hanging on the walls. I don't think I need to talk anymore. I think we need to open it to the floor.
Should you say what you're working on?
Yeah, I happen to be working on a scene along the Platte River, which Tom mentioned a few times in the middle of Nebraska. And I believe, I'm no good at counting things, but I believe there are either 99 or 101 cranes, sandhills, along the river. And I could, but I have to pick up the computer and move it around the room.
We were with Tom many years ago in 2008 when we were inspired by this scene. And that's why Bob is painting it right now.
Right. Would it be possible for you to grab the one that's lying on the table and just put it behind us?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, just a question for Tom. There was that wonderful picture of you with Robert and Birgit and Jane Goodall. Could you describe a little bit about that event? Because it's quite a unique coming together of some great people there.
Well, as you know, they're my heroes. And Robert and Birgit have worked to the Platte a couple years, I think, before that time. And like I said, Jane has been coming out there for like 18 years in a row. She couldn't come this year because of the COVID, but she just loves to get a little bit of, she travels 300 days a year up to the time of COVID. And if she always takes a week or so off to come visit the cranes because cranes are so special. And I think obviously special to Robert and to Jane and people like Peter Matheson who love cranes, and many people, obviously all kinds of Oriental art. And so they're special birds, but Robert let me know that he was coming. And so I said, why don't you come out to the cabin for a coffee or beer, a glass of wine, and let's spend some time looking at cranes. And Jane was there, and there's only, that period of a month in March when they're there, and everybody gathers, all the craniacs, and as we call them, and it's such a special place. So it was such a treat to be with the three of them, and just unforgettable time. And we just had we had a lot of laughs and fun, and to see cranes with Bob is very memorable. I can't wait to see this painting, Bob.
Unforgettable for us. The Birgit has the painting.
Oh,
I don't know
great.
if you can kind of see it.
Yes.
Here.
Oh, that looks great.
A third of it.
The third, it's a triptych, huh?
Yeah, it's a
Is that what I
triptych.
heard?
It's
Yeah. Oh my God,
long.
it looks lovely. When will it be? When will it be finished?
That's the
That's the
64,000.
question that I'm asking.
Well, I can't wait. I heard is it where's it headed or what's it for?
It's going to Omaha.
Mm.
It's actually its final destination is
The
the
Buffett Cancer
Buffett
Center.
Cancer Center in Omaha.
Wow, that'd be great. What a treat.
But it's not Warren Buffett. It's his sister's.
No, it's a cousin.
Well, it's a cousin that commissioned the painting.
Well,
We
yeah.
met Warren once or twice, but and we have other friends in Omaha. Omaha is quite a destination right in the middle of America.
Well, I have family in Omaha, and when I went to see the gorillas, I went with Howard Buffett. He was doing a project trying to keep the mountain gorillas alive there, and spent a lot of money and did a lot of contributions. So that was a big treat being with Howard. And I can't wait to see now that I'm going to Omaha off and on to see my gallery there, or my
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
gallery's actually close, but
Hmm. Oh, we've lost the sound.
Sorry, Thomas. It sounds like your sound just got disconnected or perhaps not connected.
oh, I'm sorry.
There you go. You're good now.
Okay, good.
Just have a
Anyway,
question.
I can't wait to see the painting in Omaha. It'd be great.
Gentlemen,
Even
just
see you.
have a question for the both of you before we go into some questions from the group. If there's any animal or wildlife scene that you both wish you have covered or photographed or painted, Mr. Bateman, if you'd like to start with
I'll
what that got away.
And I think the answer is no, because I'm old. I believe I'm 90, and this is so I've had a chance to do anything I want. And since I left teaching in my mid-30s, I pretty well can do whatever I want to do it with in the realm of, well, I guess in the realm of everything, including my diet and so on. But no, I don't think there's anything I haven't done that I want to do. And I've done many favorites over and over. I generally speaking like raptors and carnivores. I think it's a guy thing. I'm not big on cute little bunnies, although I've done a few cute little bunnies too.
I'm with you, Bob. I kind of like the larger megafauna, I guess. And,
and sort of fierce things.
Yeah.
Even weasels.
and I spend most of my time, like I said, might have to get a life here one of these days before too long. I'm 75, so I'm not that far behind Robert. And like I said, I've spent like 160, 70 days photographing the same family of bears I photographed for the 15 years now. There's sort of a bear season, which we call between the time they come out of their den in April to November, December, when they go back in the den. So many of those days I've been ridiculously spending time just looking for them and getting up before daybreak and coming back in the dark. And it's sort of, well, I'm hooked on her, and I was hooked on polar bears for 10 years, and I was hooked on cranes for another 15 years or so. But I should have sorted out my life a little differently, where I'd spend a couple of years here, a couple of years there. And so many times I've been to Africa. My probably biggest desire is to get back to Africa as soon as this COVID is over, and go back to Tanzania, Serengeti. I'm not a photographer just to go, have to go. I'd love to see snow leopards. I may be too old to go 18, 20,000 feet to see one. But that'd be on my bucket list, kind of, in wild pandas, I suppose. But I have to live my panda time looking at Robert's paintings of snow leopards and pandas and things like that. Now might be as close as I get to them.
Well, Birgit and I went to see snow leopards twice, having read Peter Matheson's book. And we, of course, didn't see any. But in fact, he wrote a whole book on how to not see a snow leopard.
Yeah, I read it.
He didn't see one either. But I'm pretty sure snow leopards saw us.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. Yeah.
And that's almost good enough. Makes me feel
well, as I think Peter ended up the book, you think it was his goal, but then in the end, I think he said, I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was sort of the chase or the mission or the being there and all that, right, that was touched his soul. He didn't necessarily have to see a.
And he was heavily into Zen, as you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's all about the quest and the journey.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're just going to go into some questions that some of the viewers have submitted. I'm sorry we can't take all the questions. We have quite a few here, but we do have some that were pre-sent, and so we'll kick off with a few. So this is a question for Tom, and of course, Mr. Bateman, you're welcome to answer it as well. Is there such a thing as too real? How do you feel now about your earlier camera images compared to the new digital high definition images?
Well, you maybe could tell me by looking at them. You can't really do it from a laptop on a Zoom call, but I can walk in my gallery and the images that I showed, they're in an exhibit, in the Life in the Wild exhibit at the museum now. I'd say probably 80% of them were done on film and 20% were done on digital. And I've often asked people which one is digital and which one is film. And these are photographers that mostly think they're pretty smart. And half the time they're wrong one way or the other. So it's not a matter of resolution and that necessarily. People always argue about it, but just look at images. But the biggest advantage of digital is the reason I couldn't get that. I did, as I mentioned, that Guardian Night Inlet, the black bear with a coiled rusty cable, was I had an Icon D4, and it was I had to shoot it about a 15th of a second because light was really crappy. It was cloudy and rainy, and we were in a boat, but I could only shoot it about a 15th of a second, and it was ISO 100 film. So if the digital camera, which was new, was one of the first Nikons, it was like 400 ISO film, and I could shoot it at a 60th of a second, which rendered the image sharp. The film images at 15th were blurry. Both images would have been okay, but it was just the blurry. If it was blurry, you can't do anything about it. But the digital higher ISO, higher sensitivity saved the day, and that's why I switched to digital and didn't go back. But it allows you to, with high ISOs now. I mean, I can shoot images at a 6400 or even 10,000 ISO, where I was stuck with 50 or 100 on film back when, as Robert knows. It's like you can shoot in the dark now, damn near, and so that's really the advantage. And of course, you can shoot, higher depth of field and higher shutter speeds and all that too. So digital is definitely a huge advantage. And there was no autofocus and no really good metering back in the day. Again, as Robert and I grew up with, you had to actually learn about photography and cameras and be a technician and not just point and shoot. But so anyway, I love digital now, but and I was really upset when they came out with super autofocus, because I'd spent 25 years actually learning how to manually autofocus on flying birds when most people couldn't. And they did autofocus, and anybody, my assistant or my nephew, could focus on it with his autofocus camera.
Mr. Bateman, would you like to comment on that issue about too real and maybe your experience using cameras?
Too real?
Yeah. The question was, is there such a thing as too real?
No, absolutely not. But realism and detail are two totally different things. One of my favorite artists is Edouard Degas, and people maybe don't know this. He used photography all the time. He painted from photographs very often. He's an impressionist or post-impressionist, and a camera sees things that are a slice of life of the real world. Before that, artists tended to do arrangements. And the most corny of all, the sort of the pinnacle of it, was Victorian art, where you had everything all composed like a still life of mother and father and the two little kids and the dog and the view out the window of their estate. And the whole thing just looks like a staged setup. And the impressionist said, forget about that. I'm just going to go around and go click, 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 click. And one of my favorite Degas paintings, the center of the painting is, it's of a drunken couple, the absinthe drinkers, and they're sitting in a cafe. And the center of the painting is two corners of a table and the lady's knees. And it's a total new way of looking at things, the way the real world is, instead of staged. And that's the big effect of camera for me.
Well, I think one of the things I love about YouTube, Robert, is the fact that so many artists that I've known, professional or otherwise, really poo-poo using cameras. They want to do plein air, but they don't want to, or they don't admit that they use photography for their work. It's really a big difference. And they will, they certainly do, but it's like, for some reason, they think if they use photography, it's not really right. They want to pretend like it's all in their head, which, obviously, as you just said, is not usually.
That's always puzzled me. Is that sinful?
Yeah,
Perhaps
exactly.
you won't go to heaven when you die.
That's it.
If you use photography. Yeah. I can't see any disadvantage if you do better paintings.
Nope, absolutely.
I don't get the disadvantage unless you can brag that you won a fight by having one hand tied behind your back, or a patch over one eye. I don't get the advantage of not using everything. You can get your hands.
Yeah. Bob Kuhn was in my gallery a number of years ago. He'd come here for the miniature show like you did, and one of the advantages, of course, painting. I can't put the gulls maybe in the scene with the bear with the fish, but photographically without cheating with moving imagery and stuff. But Bob Kuhn saw this caribou, which is running across this dwarf birch, red leaves in Denali in September, and it's one of my prints, and it's called Caribou in Fire or something, and it was a young caribou with small antlers, and he turned to me and to his wife, and he says, "I'm gonna fix this," and he said, "Take a picture of this." Can't remember his wife's name right now, but take a picture of this, honey, because
that's wife.
And I'm going to fix those antlers. So he did a painting of it. It's great. And he and I are best of worry. Of course, he's gone now, but he was a great influence. Of course, I left him out, but he, you knew Bob, and I'm sure he was a big influence on your work too.
Well, yes, he sure was. But he knew how to paint way more than I do. I would never be able to handle paint. He put on paint, and he could just put it on and leave it, and it would be just right.
Amazing, yeah.
Just like some of the great artists of the 19th century, like Sargent, John Singer Sargent, maybe the best one. Just put on one bit of paint, and that's a perfect cheek. You don't need to do anything else. Yeah, Bob Kuhn was like that. I was a great admirer.
Just have another question for you both. Of all the amazing sights you've seen, which is the most memorable or meaningful to you? We'll start with you, Mr. Bateman.
I missed the second
All
of the what we've seen.
the wildlife in.
Of all, go ahead. I think Birgit got it.
No, I need to hear it again
Okay.
from one of you.
Sure. Of all the amazing sights you've seen,
Amazing sights.
which is the most memorable or meaningful to you?
Amazing sights I've seen. Holy crow. I guess it would have to be in Africa. And East Africa is still amazing, and it's impossible to single one out. One of the things that again, it might be a guy thing, but seeing a kill is an amazing thing to see. And for some reason or other, although we see them on TV fairly often, a predator making a kill, which it has to do or it's going to starve to death. And Birgit has said this as well. Seeing it in the wild, a kill in the wild, doesn't seem to be as gruesome as seeing it on television, because it's just a natural thing that happens. And we've seen the stalking of the prey in the evening, and we came around the next morning, and there is the lion or small pride of lions feeding on the kill, and seeing the whole sequence. So I can't say one thing is the most amazing. Niagara Falls is not one of them. The obvious spectacular. One of the things I like to quote is Oscar Wilde, who went to see Niagara Falls, and he said, "Surely Niagara Falls must be the second great disappointment in every American marriage." But that's Oscar Wilde. I don't really want his opinion on marriage either.
That's funny. Mr. Mangelsen, your most amazing sight for you.
Oh, I think I agree with Bob. Obviously, seeing the chase or the stalk or the lion or the leopard or the cheetah, what might be, calculating the distance between killing something and missing something, and I think the stalking of it, and then the pursuit and the run and the dust and then actually grabbing it, and if it gets it or missing it, either one might be great, but grabbing it by the throat or the back, or tripping up, maybe like in a cheetah's case, tripping up it behind the back legs, that, and then watching the procession of vultures and eagles and tawny eagles and all kinds of hyenas and jackals and other things that come to feed on it. And then within maybe an hour, what was a total living antelope, you'd think it was been dead for a month, because there's not any skin or flesh or anything left of it. It's just amazing how quickly. So that is absolutely one of pretty dramatic and pretty cool. But there's so many things that we both seen. I don't know how one would say, at least I can't, what was the greatest. But wildebeest migration, the crane migration, all the things that the polar bears dancing and on the ice. It's just in the whole natural world there's so many things out there. I'd have to go on and on.
We just had a treat of a whole bunch of them looking at your photos.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just have a question for you, Mr. Mangelsen. The description of Mountain Outlaw says the bear was not looking at you, rather it was looking at a female in estrus over your shoulder. What were you thinking, positioning yourself between the bear and the...
Yeah, that looks like a really stupid thing to do, right? I felt very comfortable. I'd seen the bears on carcasses that have, I've heard two things. Every year I hear that every year I see these bison carcasses along the Yellowstone River near Lee Hardy Rapids. They get hung up in the rapids, and the bears pull them out and they feed on their winter kills. And then I heard, and I thought, how the hell could the bison be so stupid? Is every year they cross the ice right there and they fall through the ice like every year. It's like clockwork. And then I heard this, it just didn't make sense. And I heard that actually the Park Service, now this might not be true, but the Park Service picks up road kills or winter kills and dumps them off a fishing bridge, and they float down, which is a good thing to do, because it's a great way to get rid of the carcasses and get them off the road, for snowmobile seniors or whatever. And they float down to the rapids and get caught, and then the bears come there, like, again, realizing might be a banquet year after year. So, but there were usually 3, 4, 5 bears that sort of take turns. Sometimes they'd fight over them. And this one bear, we were watching him at about 300 yards and from the highway, and just north of Fishing Bridge, and a little pull out. And we saw this one bear leave the carcass, swim the river, and come up over the bank and through the woods, and he kept coming and sort of passed by the car. And it was a medium-sized bear. And then we saw 2 or 3 other bears, big ones, swimming the river and come through the woods. And all we could hear was this growling and fighting. And then, you could see the sort of fur flying in the woods. And then this one bear emerged, but the female had gone behind my Land Rover. And this one bear emerged because he could smell the female in estrus as the others could. He won the battle. He had just red scars on his eyes if you look carefully, and he was bleeding a little bit, but he could not see the female because my car was between he and the female. The female just went past my car, but was out of his sight. But he knew that she was behind my car, so he came right at me. We had no interest in me or my car, but he knew that if he came where he was going, he just wanted to go find the female. So when I had a 600 on with a 2X extenders, a 1200 millimeter lens, and he was like 110 yards or something, I don't know. But he filled the frame horizontally. I realized I had to turn it vertically to keep him in the frame. But when I looked at him with his claws, with that much magnification, I thought, holy crap, I better jump in a car. But the whole time my door was open, and was like 1 second away from jumping in, and that's what I did. But he was still at that point, 80, 100 yards away. So it looks pretty scary, but it really was. He had no interest. He went, all he wanted was his girlfriend.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of a really stupid story, which I'll try to tell very quickly. Years ago, people used to feed the bears in Yellowstone, which is a very dumb thing to do. One guy even put peanut butter all over his hand, which is sort of like a peanut butter and meat sandwich. But this guy wanted a new thing. He'd seen people reaching out of windows feeding the bears, but he thought a novel switch would be to have the bear in the car, and you outside feeding the bear that's leaning out the window. And so he had his son go around and hide behind the car, and they opened 2 doors and lured the bear in across the back seat. And then he slammed the door on the bear, and the son slammed the other door, and they had the bear in the car. By the time they got the bear out of the car, there was no interior left in the car. Not a good idea.
Well, that's reminds me, my mom and dad went to Yellowstone and on their wedding day, and for their honeymoon. In those days, the black bears were, just like you say, they were all along the road and people were feeding them. And my dad stopped to take a picture of this black bear, roadside bear, and he got out of the car. And my mom thought she was rolling up the window, but she actually was rolling it down. The bear came in the window. She jumped over to the driver's seat. The bear went immediately to the back seat and pulled out, as the old cars used to have this middle arm, which you could get into the back, into the trunk. And so the bear just went in the back seat, pulled the arm down, reached in the trunk and pulled out a jar of jelly and crunched it, my dad said, and just glass, and my mom was totally freaked out, and she, was still trying to get out of the car because she was scared. And he went back out the window, the same window he came in on my mother's side. So it could have been a very short marriage, actually, because she wasn't very happy with my father. I think that was a good test for their wedding.
Wonderful, thank you. Just another question for both of you. Do either of you have any plans to photograph or paint pandas in the wild?
Will I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Bateman, go
Robert.
ahead.
Yeah.
We've been there, tried to do that. They are extremely elusive.
You should say we
Uh,
went to Wolong
We went to Wolong
with George
and-
Schaller.
and stayed in perhaps the worst hotel I've ever been in. It almost froze the night before, and went trekking up into the mountains. But once again, as in the snow leopard, there's a chance pandas saw us. We never saw any in the wild, but that's okay because I'm a painter, and well, I take pictures, but I don't need to. I can. So I got some really good, legitimate looks at what panda habitat looks like, what chomped up bamboo looks like where the pandas have chomped the bamboo, that they had some waterfalls in Wolong where the pandas are, which are identical to Ontario waterfalls right near our cottage in Ontario. So I used an Ontario waterfall in my panda painting. And I threw in some bamboo, which I got from botanical gardens. And threw in the panda, which I got from Washington Zoo.
I tried to go to China a couple of times to photograph pandas in the wild, and as Robert said, it's damn near impossible. And that was in my much younger years, and I had a lot of things lined up, but my fixture there was denied the permits because of they figured that I must be a spy or something. I can't remember what happened. The permits crashed, and then I thought about going to Wolong, which I may still well do, but I think because it's such it's a breeding place and they're pretty wild. I guess they have lots of open space, but I think actually the real photographs in the wild are pretty rare and far between, just like snow leopards.
Birgit and I do not love visiting China. We love visiting Japan. But they have so many rules and regulations and so on. Although we love a lot of the Chinese people and they have great habitat. Anyway.
Thank you. Just have one more question for you. I know we have tons, but just thinking about time here. This is from an aspiring artist. What advice do you have on getting your photos known by the public? And what is the best way to start selling photos? So Mr. Mangelsen, if you'd like to start on that one.
Well, yeah, that's a really good question, especially today when pretty much everyone's taking photos and access to social media, and everybody has a Facebook page. And I was lucky to start when I did, when there were quite few nature wildlife photographers. But number one, you have to be passionate. There's still room for great work. Obviously, there's people every day become a great photographer, a great artist, but you have to put the time in. You have to have the passion. You have to pay your dues, so to speak, and you have to do it ethically. Not going into game farms where they rent an animal. You can go in some game farms in Montana where you can photograph a Bengal tiger and a snow leopard and a wolverine and a cougar and a bear and a African lion in a week, and they can put them all out in places that look somewhat similar to the habitat it might occur in, and then basically lie about where they got the pictures, and they spend all this time out in the field on a safari looking for wolves, and they put them in places near Glacier Park, but they're actually live in cages all their lives, which is something I really hate, because most of the cages are really small, the spaces are really small. And so anyway, there's some people that do that, and they don't want to take the time. So the whole thing is, Robert spent his whole life learning how to paint and teaching painting and looking at things and being outdoors. And so have I. So there's no easy way to sell one's photographs without getting really great photographs and getting a really great portfolio. And that takes quite a few years, unless you're, have a really special gift maybe. But there's no shortcuts. And but if you get a really good collection portfolio of imagery, and then try to have shows, I suppose is the best way. Stock of photographs for magazine and stuff are all dead because of the social media, and things like calendars are pretty dead. And so a lot of the old ways, Geographic laid off it had 52 staff photographers in its heyday, and they have none now. They have mostly contract photography. I mean, everybody of course wants to work for Geographic, but that's more and more difficult. But it's hard to say, but I suppose the first thing you have to do is get good imagery. Just like Robert has to paint good pictures, and you can't go in and just go to Africa and think you're going to come back with something probably new that somebody else hasn't already done.
In my case, I dislike the act of selling. I just, if somebody wants it, it's a nice thing, but I don't want to try to talk people into it. I know people and good friends who are, in fact, my youngest brother is really was a good salesman. And I respect that. I'm just not good at it. And so I believe in my case, I like to have a dealer or two, preferably not just one dealer. I've never signed a contract, for a dealer. Someone recommended years ago early in my career, don't get yourself all tied up into one contract. So I've never done that. And if there's a dealer that thinks they can sell my work, then go for it. And something I bear in mind a little bit, what are some of the other people in their stable? Are they the kind of people I want to associate with? That, if it's a dealer that's selling people that I admire and hold in esteem, I think that's a no-brainer if I've done something. But luckily, I've got such a waiting list of commissions and things people want. I don't, in fact, I can't remember when I last, if ever, sat and did a painting that didn't already have a destiny before I started. So I'm spoiled. I'm not a good one to ask.
You deserve it.
Well,
You worked hard at it.
yeah,
Way
but
harder than most.
not to sell. I paint obviously to please the people that are asking for it. And I hope I please the people in Omaha with the Platte River thing. But so it's not that I don't care, but that's not my prime motivation.
And my motivation isn't to sell either. I know you've made a lot of paintings, Robert. I thought, wow, this is from your heart. Might be a little bird and whatever. And I shoot what I love and what I like and what I'm passionate about. And I never think about going out and shooting something to make a buck off of it. I mean, if I got a dime for every hour I spent with $3.99, I would be probably much more well off than all the pictures I've sold of her. But you can't. That's not what I do, and I have no interest in. And my gallery, I have galleries because I think too, Robert, we talked about this years ago. Wildlife painting was sort of non-art, and wildlife photography was a stepchild of wildlife painting. So I couldn't even get my pictures in normal art galleries. So I finally had to open my own, and then I had somebody man them, and I have, it's really painful for me to go in a gallery and actually sell my work, but it's okay. I mean, but doing what I do, I have to sell my pictures, of course. It's like for you to do what you've been doing, you have to too, but you have to do it for the passion and the caring
and you have a story to go with it. You got to, each picture is a story.
Thank you.
Thank you. Birgit, I noticed you're there. Do you have a perspective on how to become a professional or successful photographer?
Well, the one thing I was going to say, if the person who's asked the question could have an exhibit in their local area. For example, that's how I started. I went to Art Spring on Salt Spring Island and asked, can anyone have a show? And they said, yes, but you have to rent the gallery space. So I did it for 1 week and I had a show. So you have to get it out into the public somehow. And online, there are so many people nowadays, it's hard to be distinctive. Whereas if you have your own show, maybe that's a possible way that you can start. Anyway.
I agree. Yeah, there's coffee shops here in town and restaurants and hotels and a lot of them, and they're rotating ones. So it might be one artist 1 month and another artist another month.
Right.
And that is a really one of the real valuable things about art. I think you can do that.
Yeah.
But,
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Bateman, Mr. Mangelsen, really appreciate you participating today. Really enjoyed it. We're so honored to have you. Just a couple of acknowledgements. I'd like to also include other people to talk about. Erin Henshaw and Sydney Trepanier, thank you so much for their work installing the exhibit. I want to thank David Wagner, who made this exhibit possible, and his input and support of the Bayman Foundation is really good. We have our own team here too, and with the help of, I'm going to put my mask on because they're coming into the room. I'd like to thank Chantal McDonald, Ken, Lauren. This is who they are. All of this is made possible through their hard work.
and here's my assistant here, Sue and Tiffany, who I can't do anything without, especially technically. I'm totally clueless. That's Tiffany and here's Sue. Anyway, we're kind of in the dark here. Yeah, they've kept me upright and straight and on task, and I would be fooling with this computer forever if I can barely do email. So they helped make this work tonight, and all the imagery is everything I've done is dependent on a lot of people around me helping. So thanks to them and the ones before them.
Thank you.
Tom,
Mhm.
hearing your words was truly inspiring.
Thank you, Barry.
Okay.
That means a lot.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody who's come on board to listen and to watch. I'd like to just say, if you'd like to visit the batemanfoundation.org website to know more about what we're doing, if you'd like to make a donation to the charity, there's plenty of opportunities there. Just to help support us in what we're doing, and of course to follow on and make sure the legacy of Mr. Bateman and Mr. Mangelsen continues in our natural world. Good night, everybody. Thank you for
Thank you,
joining
Peter.
us.
Good night.
That was good,
Right.
Peter.
Good night, Robert. Birgit, thank you so much.
Yeah, night, Tom.
Care.
See you soon.
Okay,
Hope so.
come back to the plat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.